Hey guys, Kelli Stewart here, doing a evening live stream. I'm going to wait just a minute here and I'm going to pull in John Lamb in just a minute. We'll see how much time we have. Got about 25 minutes till I need to wrap this up. So, hey Walden, I'm just waiting for John to come on. I'm going to pull him in here. Hey Tammy. John should see it in just a second. Hey, Thomas. Good to see you guys. Hey, Joydy. Angela. Somebody can tag John and let him know I'm ready. I had a couple of really good but hard calls today with a few individuals. One was Schaefer Cox and Tammy. You're funny. I had a good talk today with Schaefer Cox. Some of you will remember that he has 2 phone calls a week, 15 minutes each. He is in a communication management unit. It is not even approved by Congress. It's not paid for by Congress. And anyway, so when he calls, it is a big deal. I try to set that time aside when he's able to call and really be attentive. Can you guys hear me okay? I'm on a headset. Still just waiting for, maybe you guys can do a thumbs up and let me know if you can hear me. Just waiting for John to pop in here. I haven't seen him yet. There he is. Okay. Let's see if we can add John Lamb. All right. Thanks for letting me know you can hear me. We'll get John pulled in. Hey, John.
Here I am.
Good to see you. Thanks for coming on so we could talk. Okay, we're going to have to get right to it. I have 23 minutes. Wednesdays are my crazy days. I'm running all over town with kiddos, and so once again, I'm in my vehicle. That is the life of a mother. Some of you moms out there understand we live in our cars. So what I wanted to do first, thank you, John, for coming on and being able to talk, being willing to talk about the Gordon Call case. I've now spoken to Scott Faul twice from prison, and for those of you who follow my public posts and sometimes feel like, gosh, Kelly's so negative. You know, when you spend your time around people who are suffering and being held in bondage and their families are suffering, and you see all around you that people, for the most part, don't care, it is difficult to stay positive. And John's a lot better at it than I am, but I do carry the weight of what I learn of these cases. Personally, I have the gift of empathy, which means I lose a lot of sleep over these cases. So I've talked to Scott Faul twice, John, this week, and John and I haven't prepped on this call. I just asked if he'd come on and help me with some of the details around this case. And so I'm just going to start by sharing a little bit about what I've learned quickly with Scott, and then John's going to pop in at times and help me with the story. So many of you know Aaron and Rudy Davis. They are amazing warriors for Christ, and they have been getting a lot of stories out there. And I see them as like this central hub where you can go to learn stories. But we really need to take responsibility for our country and go to them and take those stories as they're giving them to us and kind of adopt some of these people, because they can't possibly dive in and do everything that's needed for every one of these prisoners. So Aaron got me in touch with Scott Faul. He is currently incarcerated with Jake Ryan. And of course, that's always nice to connect with people who are sitting in prison with our political prisoners from the refuge or Bunkerville. And I've been able to speak to him now twice. Probably the majority of my posts in the last 2 weeks that have been maybe not quite as positive regarding the situation in America have been because of these calls with Scott. Because what do you say to a man who's been sitting in jail for over 30 years for using his Second Amendment right in self-defense to protect himself, to protect his friends? This is the Gordon Call case. Talking to somebody who has spent most of his life now in prison. Do you know how old Scott is right now, John?
I'd be guessing. I've lost track of his age. I know he was pretty young, in his late 20s or so when this all happened in 1983.
So he's probably early 60s now, maybe.
Yeah, early 60s, yes.
Yeah.
And they were considered back then. They were considered tax protesters. They'd been protesting taxes. Actually, Gordon Call started it, and he started it back actually in the late 60s. protesting taxes. And there's a book that is written that's well worth reading. It's called Death and Taxes. It's about Gordon Call and his case. And I recommend that book to anybody to read it. It'll really tell them everything about this case they really need to know.
Yeah, and there's also a video. I posted it on my page. You can find it on YouTube. Gordon was actually in trouble for not paying into also the Social Security system, which back then was supposed to be voluntary. And it ended up costing him his life. And this is, 1983 this happened. So the government killing the people who resist in any way is not something new. But talking to Scott, I think the biggest things that have grieved me is, one, that he is not allowed to have any visitations from anybody that he's met since he's been incarcerated. So for people who haven't followed some of what we've been doing in trying to expose what's going on in the prison industrial complex in America, we literally create criminals and then we financially profit on prosecuting them in the United States. And our agencies go out and create crimes and then pat themselves on the back when they solve those crimes that they themselves created. So learning that Scott has not had a visitor in years because all the people that he has met in the last 30 years cannot come to see him. That is absolutely satanic to me, to take a human being and tell them you can only have visitors from people you met before you came to jail. Oh, but by the way, you're going to spend life in prison, because he was given, it used to be 30 years was life. So he was given life in prison and then told, by the way, anybody you meet along the way, they can't support you or encourage you. But the other thing is that most of his family, it took a serious toll on his family, and most of them have all but walked away from him, because living the double life of living with your heart in prison and then walking the streets is so difficult, because you're trying to talk about America and this great country, and then here your loved one is sitting in prison being abused and violated, and all his rights have been taken away. And so they finally just had to walk away from him many, many years ago. And as a result, he is suffering. He is suffering what no human should have to suffer. And he can't even connect with his family now because they've stopped answering his calls many, many years ago. And because he can't have visitations from any new people that he's met, he is essentially isolated, and all of his friends are just the fellow prisoners. And that talking with him, I'm not sure that I would be such a brave prisoner to make it 30 years in prison. I'm just being honest. I don't think I would make a very good prisoner, and I think I'd cause a whole lot of problems in that jail, and I'd probably spend most of it in solitary confinement. To mentally adjust to living your entire life behind bars when you know that you didn't seek to harm anybody and you were only defending your own life. And after all, that's what all the patriots tell us we can do, right? You can defend your life, and then you defend your life and you end up with life in prison and everybody walks away from you. I mean, what an absolute atrocity of an American story is around this case with both Yori. Yori is Gordon's son. Yori's father is murdered by the government, and he and his friend Scott are arrested and put away for life. I mean, this is what the government does. They literally destroy families for their money and their power and their greed. John, can you add any details around the story? I've watched the video, I've watched the documentary, but I know you have more connections with your family to Gordon Call. Can you tell us anything more or add quickly to these guys?
Well, Gordon Call, he was the founder, the forefather of this, and pretty much one of the forefathers of the grassroots movement of the tax protesting. Mm-hmm. He made it his life. He knew that he was going to pay taxes the rest of his life, and if it killed him, it did. And Gordon went to prison in 1977 for his stand. Mm-hmm. He was a veteran. He had actually served in the military, the armed forces.
Yeah, he was a World War II veteran. He had fought, right? And he came home, and that's when he started his...
He was born in 1920. He was a World War II veteran. Fought for the country he loved, and he was born in, and he was back about 1968. He decided something was wrong with the tax system and them embezzling all this money. So he decided not to pay anymore. He rescinded his Social Security number, got rid of it, got out of the tax system. He even refused to take his pension when he became eligible from the military, from the government. He didn't want Social Security. He didn't want their pension. He didn't want anything from the government. So from about 1968 or so until he went to prison in 1977, 9 years there, he never received any money from him, never cashed a single check, even moved away from him so they didn't come to him no more. And ended up going to prison. They shipped him all the way down to Texas to a federal prison. He served his time, but they still wasn't done with him. They kept harassing him, pulling him back in court. And again, in about 1983, he was still in court again. That was about 6 years later.
All over the taxes, right? It was all over the not wanting to pay the Social Security tax, and and the income tax as well. But I learned he wouldn't have actually even owed any income tax because of his income versus his household size. So they really were going after him on the principle alone because he wouldn't file those taxes, because he really didn't even owe them any money. It was all about his resistance that they wouldn't let go.
The government owed him more money than he would have ever owed them. Him not taking the checks and everything.
I think it's important to note, some people try to tell us on how to do things and how to get out of some of these systems, but what they don't understand is if they're getting away with it, it's because they haven't been influencing other people publicly. So Gordon had the IRS speak in his documentary, in an interview. And they said that the reason they went after him is because the year that he really dug his heels in, he had 200 other people who also went to their employers and said, stop taking out Social Security tax. And the IRS said 200 people was too much. We had to make an example out of him. So when people say, oh, I can do this, and why aren't you doing this right? And just file these magic papers. What they don't understand is it's the Bruce Doucetts and the Gordon Calls who end up spending life in prison or getting killed by the government, the Lavoy Finnecums, those at Waco. It's those who are actually impacting others who really end up paying with their life.
And he went public on a radio before they targeted him in 1977, went public nationwide on a radio talk show, and hundreds of people were intrigued by what he was doing and was interested in doing the same thing. Well, they ended up targeting him. He went to prison. The evidence, again, wasn't even back then allowed in court. They made him out to be some crazy guy.
Yep. I remember that. They tried to make him out to be like a white supremacist, and his wife was just mind-boggled. She was like, where did this even come from? But it was the beginning of that isolate, demonize, and destroy.
They do, and they use all these labels that make people think, oh, it's a compound. They're white supremacists. They're this and that, or they're anti-government. And Gordon Call was not anti-government. Right. He looked for his day in court. He thought he was going to get a fair trial in the country that he loved. Again, in 1983, when it was winding down at the end of his life there, he was in court that day, in federal court in North Dakota. And he was on his way home. Them U.S. Marshals could have arrested him on that warrant that day, or his son, Yori, or Scott Faul. Instead, they let him leave. Yeah. And they waited outside of town in a desolate, deserted area. North Dakota's wide open. They set up a roadblock and an ambush. And they accused Yori Call and Scott Faul of the same things that they did to them. They said that Yori Call and Scott Faul ambushed the U.S. Marshals, but the U.S. Marshals had this roadblock up out there. They didn't even know it existed. And it's questionable, I guess, by both sides, just being non-biased, who fired the first shots. Yori Call claims that the Marshals fired, and they fired back in self-defense. 2 Marshals died that day, and 3 other Marshals were seriously wounded. Gordon Call escaped and left, and his son Yori made him leave, and Scott left, and Yori was also shot and seriously wounded. They stayed behind, and they ended up getting arrested, and they was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Well, it's been over 30 years now, and they're still in prison. And they're expected right now. Their next possible release date is 2023.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite not too far away, but still, it's a long time when you've already been there 35 years in
Yeah.
prison.
Yeah, especially that age. And especially when you know in your heart of hearts that all you did was act in self-defense and the road was blocked. And some people would say, well, why didn't they just go into the court hearing? Why is the road blocked? Why are we being ambushed over taxes and Social Security? What this
Well, the road was blocked that day for Lavoy Finicum too,
right?
and the shots were fired before he ever even hit that snowbank.
Yep.
And it was, it's whose side is going to be believed out there. Them marshals knew what vehicle they were driving. Yori Call and Scott and Gordon, they didn't have any intel knowing that there was going to be a roadblock. It was a total surprise to them that day.
Yeah.
So you can't tell me that they knew of that roadblock and they started firing first. That's not what happened.
No, they were completely taken. And there is a day and an age back in our, framers' time where it wouldn't have been unreasonable to fire at somebody who's trying to kidnap you. That would be a normal American response to somebody who's trying to kidnap you. But we have become so brainwashed in whatever the law says we do, that now the law says they can kidnap you, and we have to go along with it, not because it's right, but because the majority of society supports that. And so if you resist in any way, you're now the outcast, you're now the criminal, instead of the ones who are actually trying to kidnap you.
The big question is why didn't they arrest him in the courthouse when they had a chance? All of them was there. They're all unarmed.
Mm-hmm.
Why did they wait and set up an ambush 20 miles out of town? It doesn't make sense.
When they knew that they were going to be armed and they knew that they would try to defend themselves if they were fired upon. I mean, this is the common thread. And same with Schaefer Cox, same with Jeff Winehouse, that they know that if they can get you in a shootout, they know the law will protect them and the law will not protect us because we have no Second Amendment right in America. No real. Yes, they let you have a gun for hunting and all that, but the Second Amendment was designed to protect you against tyrants if they tried to kidnap you. So because we have no Second Amendment right anymore and it's been outlawed, the laws protect the tyrants but not the people, which how crazy in America.
Yeah, your Second Amendment, I call it privileges, vary from state to state. Illinois, you have to register your shotgun. You can't even own a shotgun. So is that a right or is that a privilege? If you do not register your shotgun or your rifle or your pistols, then you're not legal. So you're breaking the so-called law. So this is not rights. These are privileges. Every one of these rights that we call constitutional rights are now constitutional privileges.
Yep.
And people have been brainwashed to think my permit is my right.
Yep.
And that's not a right. That's a privilege. Anytime you have to buy something back, it is definitely a privilege and not a right any longer.
And we've let it get so far that now it's to the point where, it's either comply or die. It's either play it their way or you're going to end up spending life in prison or dead on the side of the road. And each person has to decide for them. We know what Lavoy chose. Lavoy said, I'm not going to live in a cart, in a cell, in a cement box. I'm going to live free. And we know that, Randy Weaver really fought and held out as long as he could in Waco. But not everybody has that same level of conviction or freedom isn't worth the same amount to everybody. There's many people that are willing to be enslaved, to be comfortable, and to not be murdered on the side of the road. But I still think it's important, like you were saying about the privileges, that we're able to identify. And it's kind of like when counselors, psychologists will talk about a split. Make sure your split isn't big. Like, who are you at home versus in public, or who are you internally on the outside? I just want our splits to all be brought in together. I want us to know who we are on the outside and the inside, and to be able to say that in this current day and age, the laws have enslaved each and every one of us. There's going to be a battle to break free from that slavery now, because nobody just gives up their slaves, easily. There's always a fight to regaining your freedom. But our biggest problem in America is most people won't even identify and say that we have a problem. They still say we are the most wonderful country in the world. And if that's the case to those people, I want you to take some of these phone calls from these prisoners. I want you to hear how great of of a country we are and how beautiful our freedoms is. Talk to the slaves and the ones who are being locked away in cages, and listen to their children crying and look at their families being ripped apart. And then you might get, you know, a little bit negative, a little bit critical too, because that's where we are right now as a country. It doesn't mean I want it to stay this way. It's just that's what we're all dealing with, and we have to get to the point where we can speak the truth. And the truth is, our government has grown outside of the confines of the Constitution and has enslaved the people. We've allowed our politicians to make it legal. Our slavery has now become legal. So in wrapping up with the Gordon Call case, I'm going to keep talking to Gordon. I'm sorry, not Gordon, but I'm going to keep talking to Scott and try to get some of his story out. He's actually petitioning. He wants to petition for a presidential pardon. And so we're going to try to help him with that. This man has served beyond his time, and it's time to get this man out and home to his family. So if you guys can be praying for, Scott. And let's see, that's probably going to be way bright. Yeah, it is way bright. If you guys can be praying for Scott, and if any of you wants more information on his story, we'll try to get that out there and try to keep you guys updated on where he's at with getting his freedom. And Yori's in the same boat as Scott. Yori is also in prison, and that is Gordon's son. Do you want to add anything before I talk quickly about Schaefer? John?
Yeah, Schaefer, you know, he's in Terre Haute, Indiana. He's in a dark, dark place there, a prison that's horrible. Same place as where, it may not be the same facility area where he's at, but same where was Timothy McVeigh was at. You know, the same prison there anyway. And so I don't know what else to say about him except that I've looked over his case thoroughly, and he's definitely an innocent person. He was set up. He's probably one of our biggest political prisoners that I know of, you know, besides Leonard Peltier or Gordon Call or
Greg Burleson. Greg Burleson, who also has
Burleson,
68 years.
Yeah. Todd Engel. Mm-hmm. But you know, all of these guys are political prisoners. But what Schaefer has went through is horrible, just like all the other guys.
Yeah.
And we definitely need to bring as much awareness to this as we can.
Yeah.
And you know, his informants, that they don't want to see him out.
No,
they know
don't.
They'll be exposed.
And they'll lose a lot of money. And so that's where I'll wrap this up with Schaefer is, Schaefer is an incredibly encouraging individual despite the conditions he's living in. He wants as much public support as he can right now as he's working with Larry Klayman, his newly hired attorney, on a presidential pardon. He's also got 3 open civil cases because he has been getting thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of discovery that is being now revealed to him that completely shows his innocence. It was all withheld during his trial. So he has resentencing coming up. You can get more information. He's got an amazing team who's working for him. They have a page up and going. They're getting his messages out. And if you want to send a letter, please, 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 if you'll send a letter to Trump, I think it actually has to be done by this Friday. You can get onto Deborah Cochran's page or Angela Clemens to get that information. He really needs that letter. And it really is important when you're petitioning the president for a pardon to have those letters in hand. And so if you guys will quickly write up a letter and get that sent over to his support group, that would be awesome. Gosh, these lights are so awful. When are we going to get like a real setup, John? So Schaefer wants people to know that he's not giving up hope and that he's going to need support, but he has a lot of faith right now and hope in Larry Klayman and the work that he's doing on his pardon. So please come on board and help with that. One thing I'll say that he mentioned to me, we were talking briefly about the day that his wife and 2 children, a 6-week-old baby girl and 2-year-old little boy, when they came to arrest him, they knew he wasn't there. They were going to the house and it was all women and children. They showed up with masks on. See, this is sometimes why I'm negative, I think, because I know a little bit too much about what our government has done to people now. They showed up at the house with masks on, black masks, and all of their SWAT team gear. And they kicked in the door, and in front of the children, they held down the women. And they said, if you move, we will kill you like we did at Ruby Ridge. And when we were talking about that, it was so upsetting to me because in the Bundy trials, they were not allowed to mention that they went to Bunkerville because of Ruby Ridge and Waco. So the government can use Ruby Ridge when they're trying to scare the hell out of the public and let the public know that they mean business. But the people cannot use it in their defense in saying, this is what I know my government is capable of. And so, hang on, do you want to, well, actually, let's just wrap this up. So that's disgusting to me that an agent can do that and that we can still say, you know, back our law enforcement, back our politicians. All the laws made it possible and totally legal for them to do what they did to his wife and his babies that day when they said, don't move or we will kill you, like we did at Ruby Ridge. People need to understand that we're literally run at this point by terrorists, and we need to keep speaking the truth because these people are suffering and they need us to be the voices out here helping to keep them from being completely forgotten and silenced in these holes that they're living in. Do you want to say anything?
Exactly.
You want to close out with anything?
Well, Ryan Payne's going to be home in a couple of days here in Montana.
Today,
so we're
yeah,
glad to
Ryan's out. Ryan's out now, and he should be home in the next couple hours. And then John Ritzheimer gets out, I think, the 3rd. Jake Ryan on the 10th, and then Daryl and Dwayne are in the halfway houses. And am I forgetting anybody? Is that the final 5? But they're all going to still need support. They have all appeals to fight. John Ritzheimer is going to be a halfway house for a year. Everybody still needs help. So let's keep plugging in. The haters come out of the woodwork whenever things get hard and people get tired. So let's unify and make sure that we keep focused on the prisoners who still need us. As soon as all the prisoners are free, I promise you won't have to see any more live streams from me. So I got to sign off, but God bless you guys. And thanks, John, for coming on and talking about these 2 cases.
Thanks. God bless.
Bye-bye.